You got better. That's all you did. You got a little clearer about who you are, a little more honest about what you wanted, a little less willing to disappear into whatever the room needed you to be. You didn't announce it. You didn't make it anyone's problem. You just quietly stopped shrinking. And someone in your life lost their mind about it. Not loudly, maybe. Just cold. A new distance. A tone that didn't used to be there. Suddenly you were different. Suddenly you were too much. Suddenly every conversation had a low hum of tension that you couldn't explain, and somehow you were the one expected to fix it. You grew. They punished you for it. And part of you, the part that's been doing this for a long time, started wondering if you should apologize. That part is what this video's about. Researchers who study manipulation tactics found something in 1987 that most people never hear. Controlling people don't have a destination in mind for you. They don't want you to reach some final acceptable version and stay there. The shifting expectations, the moving goalposts, the way that pleasing them once just produces a new thing to please. That's not a bug. That's the design. The goal was never your behavior. The goal was your willingness to keep rearranging yourself on demand. They were never attached to any version of you. They were attached to the rearranging. Epictetus saw this coming. 2,000 years ago, a man who was literally owned by another person wrote about the difference between your body being controlled and yourself being controlled. He said only one of those was actually possible. We'll get there, and it matters more than you'd expect. But first, let's talk about why you kept doing it. Why it felt less like giving in and more like just surviving the day. The reason you kept performing the version of yourself they wanted isn't because you're weak. It's because your nervous system is extraordinarily good at its job. Here's what that looks like from the inside. You're in a conversation and you feel it before you can name it. A shift in their energy. Something's off. They haven't said anything yet, but the air has changed, and some part of you, faster than thought, faster than decision, starts adjusting. Your tone gets softer. Your opinion gets smaller. You choose the careful word instead of the true one. You do all of this before you've consciously decided to do any of it. You probably called that being sensitive, being perceptive, being good at reading the room. It wasn't. It was a survival circuit running. In 2013, psychotherapist Pete Walker published research identifying a fourth trauma response that most people have never heard of. Fight, flight, freeze. The fourth one is fawn. And unlike the others, fawning doesn't look like fear. It looks like agreeableness, warmth, flexibility. Someone who's just easy to be around. But underneath, the nervous system has made a very specific calculation. Become what the threat needs. And the threat might leave you alone. Dr. Arielle Schwartz, a clinical psychologist who has worked extensively with complex trauma, describes it this way. Fawning leads a person to disconnect from their own emotions, needs, and sensations, not as a choice, as an automatic response. The nervous system running a program it wrote when the program was necessary. And here's the part that tends to sit uncomfortably. The program usually gets written in childhood, in houses where expressing a need felt dangerous, in houses where love was present but conditional, warm when you were manageable, cold when you weren't. The child in that house doesn't learn people-pleasing. They learn something more fundamental. They learn that the self is the problem, that the authentic version of you is the thing most likely to cost you safety. So they file it away, quietly, completely. And then 20, 30 years later, you end up in a relationship with someone who operates on exactly the same logic as that childhood house, and your nervous system doesn't raise an alarm. It feels familiar. It feels, in some strange way, like home. I spent years thinking I was just easygoing. Genuinely believed it. Turned out there's a difference between easygoing and having quietly decided, somewhere along the way, that conflict cost more than it was worth. I didn't notice the difference until I realized the easygoing never stopped. Even when I was alone, even when there was no one in the room to manage, I was still softening opinions I was having by myself. That's not a personality. That's a habit of self-erasure that got so practiced it started running in the background. So your nervous system adapted. Fine. It did what it had to do. Now, here's where it gets strange. Because the person using that adaptation against you may not have designed it consciously. The mechanism they're running is older than they are too. Here's the part that almost everyone gets backwards. You don't stay in a controlling relationship because it's good sometimes. You stay because it's unpredictably good. And that is a completely different trap. Listen to how people describe these relationships when they're trying to explain why they haven't left. When they're good, they're incredible, thoughtful, attentive. You feel like the only person in the room. You just never know which version you're going to get. Everyone who hears that nods like it's a reason to leave. It's actually the reason leaving feels impossible. Because what you just described isn't a relationship with occasional bright spots. You described a behavioral conditioning loop that B.F. Skinner first mapped in the 1950s. And it is, by every measure psychology has, the most powerful psychological trap ever documented. Here's how Skinner found it. He was running experiments at Harvard. Rats, levers, food pellets. He tried rewarding the liver press every single time. The rats pressed reliably. Then he tried rewarding it never. The rats stopped. Expected. But then he tried something different. He rewarded the lever press randomly. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. No discernible pattern. And the rats became obsessed. They pressed compulsively, persistently, far beyond any behavior he'd seen before. And when he stopped the rewards entirely, they took longer to quit than any other group. Skinner called it a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. He also noted, almost as an aside, that it was the exact mechanism behind a slot machine. If the machine paid every pull, you'd get bored. If it never paid, you'd walk away. Because it pays unpredictably, you can't stop. You're convinced the next pull is the one. In a controlling relationship, the warm moments are the payout, their affection, their approval, their sudden inexplicable tenderness on a Tuesday afternoon. That's the lever paying out. And your nervous system, which did not consent to any of this, becomes the gambler. Hyper-vigilant, constantly reading their mood, adjusting your behavior in real time, trying to figure out what combination produces the reward. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. The more inconsistent someone's warmth is, the stronger the psychological bond becomes. Not weaker, stronger. You are not failing to see clearly. Your brain is behaving exactly as a brain behaves under variable reinforcement. You are doing precisely what the mechanism produces. The times they were wonderful are not evidence that the relationship is worth saving. Those moments are the architecture of why you can't leave. There was a version of this in my own life I didn't name for a long time. Someone who was intermittently warm in a way that, looking back, I was working harder to earn than anything I'd ever actually wanted. I remember the specific relief of the good days. That relief was the tell. You don't feel relief when someone is consistently kind. You feel relief when the machine finally pays out. 2,000 years before Skinner had a lab, a man who had actually been owned by another human being figured out the countermove, and it wasn't what you'd expect. Around 65 CE, Seneca sat down to write a letter to his younger friend Lucilius. It was letter 7. He was writing about crowds, but he was actually writing about you. Some context matters here. Seneca was not writing from a position of innocence. He had been one of the most powerful men in Rome, chief advisor to Emperor Nero, shaper of policy for over a decade, a man who had watched up close what relentless social pressure does to a person's character. He had watched people remake themselves in real time to survive proximity to power. He had, by his own admission, done some of it himself. Then he retired. And then, in the last years of his life, he started writing letters that were trying to work something out. In letter 7, he warned Lucilius about what happens when you spend too much time around people who want you to be different. He named specific men, Socrates, Cato, Laelius, the most morally fortified figures he could think of, and said even they could have been worn down by sustained exposure to a crowd unlike them. Not through argument, not through force, just through the slow, invisible pressure of being surrounded by people who expected something else from you. Then he wrote the line that still lands strange. Many men praise you, but have you any reason for being pleased with yourself if you are a person whom the many can understand? Read that again slowly. If everyone approves of you, Seneca was saying, that is not a compliment, that is a question. Which version of you did they approve of? How much of yourself did you quietly file away to earn that approval? Universal comfort with who you are is not evidence that you've arrived. It's evidence that you've been edited down to something palatable. Then there's Epictetus. A generation before Seneca's letters, Epictetus was born into slavery in Hierapolis, present-day Turkey, and brought to Rome as the property of Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman and secretary to Nero. There is a story, recorded by the early Christian theologian Origen, that Epaphroditus once grabbed Epictetus by the leg in a fit of rage and began twisting it. Epictetus, entirely calm, said, "You will break my leg." When it broke, he said, "I told you so." That is not a story about pain tolerance. That is a demonstration of philosophy in real time. Epictetus understood something that his master could not reach. His body was owned. His leg could be broken. But there was something inside him, what the Stoics called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the innermost governing self, that Epaphroditus had no access to whatsoever. You could control the container. You could not touch what was inside it. He spent the rest of his life teaching that distinction, not as abstract philosophy, as the most practical thing he knew. In the discourses recorded by his student Arion, he laid it out plainly. Some things are in our power, and some things are not. Your body, your reputation, what other people think of you, not yours. Your judgments, your values, your choices about who you are, entirely yours, always, without exception. The controlling person in your life has made a structural error. They believe your character belongs to them. Epictetus would find that almost philosophically naive. You can reshape someone's behavior through pressure, yes, but the self, the actual self, the part that knows the difference between performing and being, that part does not transfer. It can be buried. It can go quiet for years, but it does not belong to anyone else. It never did. What Seneca understood in 65 CE, psychology researchers didn't measure until 1996, and when they finally measured it, the number they got made everything worse. There's a phrase people use when they finally leave a controlling relationship. You've probably heard it. You may have said it yourself. I don't even know who I am anymore. Most people treat that as emotional language, metaphor, the kind of thing you say when you're exhausted and trying to explain something that doesn't quite have words. But in 1996, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia named Jennifer Campbell published research that took that sentence completely literally and found out it was clinically accurate. Campbell developed something called the Self-Concept Clarity Scale, 12 items, measuring how clearly, consistently, and stably a person understands who they actually are, not who they perform, not who they've been told they are, who they are when the room is empty and nobody is watching and there's no social calculation running. That clarity, her team found, is one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being, emotional regulation, and relationship quality that exists. People with high self-concept clarity make better decisions, recover faster from setbacks, and are significantly harder to manipulate. People with low self-concept clarity are easier to rewrite. Later research built on Campbell's work and found something that should be taught in every high school in the country and isn't. Self-concept clarity measurably deteriorates in controlling relationships over time. The longer you spend with someone who keeps shifting who you're supposed to be, the less stable your own self-understanding becomes. The confused, formless feeling that survivors describe, I don't know what I like anymore. I don't know what I actually think. I don't know where they end and I begin. That is not emotional exhaustion talking. That is a documented cognitive state with a measurement and a trajectory. Seneca wrote in 65 CE that sustained exposure to people who want you different will make you different. Campbell measured the mechanism in 1996 and gave it a name. 2,000 years apart, the same finding. But here's where the stakes become something more than personal. By the time self-concept clarity deteriorates far enough, the self that would decide to leave has been partially disassembled. You're not staying because you love them. You're not staying because you're afraid of being alone. You're staying because the version of you that would have packed a bag and walked out, that version got quietly edited out over months and years of small adjustments and moved goalposts and intermittent warmth that trained you to keep trying. The decision-making structure that would have left is no longer fully intact. This is why people on the outside can't understand it. They keep asking why you don't just leave. And the answer, the true answer, is that leaving requires a self that knows what it wants. And that's exactly what got taken. I remember reading Campbell's research and sitting with an uncomfortable thought for longer than I wanted to. Some of what I'd called my most confident years had been spent performing confidence rather than actually having it. I'd had a very clear picture of who I was, and I'd been assembling that picture almost entirely from the feedback of people around me. That's not self-concept clarity. That's self-concept outsourcing. The research made the difference legible in a way I didn't have language for before. If they eroded clarity, and the research is unambiguous that they did, the way back is clarity, not confrontation, not a list of warning signs to memorize for next time, something quieter and considerably harder. The antidote to being rewritten by someone else is not learning to spot manipulators. It's becoming harder to rewrite. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Most of the advice you'll find on this topic is about the other person, their patterns, their tactics, their red flags, and some of that is useful, but it puts the frame in the wrong place. It makes the problem about them, something to detect and avoid, as if the solution is better pattern recognition next time, a sharper eye for warning signs, a more suspicious posture toward new people. That's not it. That's just anxiety with a more sophisticated vocabulary. The actual shift is internal, and it was described with uncomfortable precision by a Swedish research team in 2023. They ran a randomized controlled trial, 210 participants, 8 weeks pre-registered at clinical trials. They were testing cognitive behavioral assertiveness training. And here's the part worth sitting with. Even participants who went through the program completely alone, no therapist, no guidance, just the structured work, they showed measurable reductions in social anxiety, measurable reductions in depressive symptoms, and meaningful increases in what the researchers called healthy assertive expression. A separate study on the specific mechanism found out why. Assertiveness training doesn't primarily make you louder. What it actually does, measurably, is increase self-disclosure, your capacity to state who you actually are clearly to yourself and to other people. Not perform it, not negotiate it, state it. And here's what that means for the dynamic we've been describing all video. The controlling person's leverage depends entirely on your malleability, on the gap between who you actually are and who you're willing to present. The wider that gap, the more room they have to operate. Close the gap, not through aggression, not through confrontation, just through the steady, practiced act of knowing what you think and saying it, and the leverage disappears. Not dramatically, quietly. There's simply nothing left to work with. Epictetus put the protocol in a single sentence in the Discourses. The chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. That's not a philosophical position. That's a daily practice. Know what's yours. Name it. Hold it. 2,000 years before the randomized controlled trial, same instruction. This is not fast work. Self-concept clarity doesn't rebuild in a week. The fawn response doesn't unwire itself because you read about it. The slot machine loses its pull gradually, not all at once, but the direction is simple, even when the work isn't. Ask yourself what you actually think, separate from what you've been trained to think. Say it, quietly if you need to. Once, if that's all you can manage today. To yourself, if there's no one safe to say it to yet. The gambler stops losing the moment they stop needing the payout. And if this video is going to suggest one thing, not 5 steps, not a framework, just one thing, it's this. Find the next video on this channel about the inner citadel. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around the specific question of what cannot be taken from you. It turns out the answer is longer than most people think. Now, at the beginning of this video, you were asking a question you maybe didn't know you were asking. What happens to a person inside after years of being reshaped on demand? Whether there's anything left, whether you can get it back. You can, but what you're reclaiming isn't the person you were before they got to you. That version existed inside the relationship too, somewhere. Quieter than it should have been, smaller than it wanted to be, but there. What you're reclaiming is the person you would have become if they'd never had the chance to edit you. That person has been waiting the whole time. They never liked you. They liked the version of you that didn't know the difference.